And I am Chick Bennett. And cue the music, Michael. We made it. We made it. 100 episodes. Can you believe it? It's crazy. Michael, I want you to cut in. I want you to cut in right here the audio of our very first intro ever. Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Yep. Yep. It's been a while. I'm looking it up right now. I know. Hmm. Let's see. It was 2016. You said it was 2016. So 2 kids. Yeah, I think so. 2 kids from that time. Yep. Yes. Yes. It's been crazy. Yeah. We've got, I'm looking back at the show notes from episode 1, and we're talking about Laravel queues, how serializes model traits works. Adam Wathan's refactoring to collections book had just come out at that point. Um, your nullable fields package, all sorts of good stuff, man. Yep, that is how we met. I used the nullable fields package like it was going out of style, and yeah, I used it to death. I used it on every project, and then I would be like, "Hey, Michael, used your package again. Nice job. Way to go. Thanks so much for maintaining this." You're like, "Yeah, no problem, mate. Good on you." And then, eventually, yeah, they've got it now. Yeah, the trimmed strings one. Yeah, it used to be a real problem. Yeah, it used to be a real problem. You could probably just like, yeah, it's a what are they? You could archive it or not, maybe not archive it, but what's it called? Like, you can set it with like not actively maintained anymore because you really don't. Yeah, to pasture. Yep, exactly. Went to the farm, sent the dog to the farm. So yeah, man, it's been a good run, and we're sad to inform everybody this will be the last episode because no, I'm just kidding. We have at least one more because I already pre-recorded one with uh-huh, perfect. Yeah, yep. Hopefully it'll be a pretty quick edit. I don't think there was too much to chop up. I think we both were pretty comfortable. Aaron runs his own podcast, so he's not new to the podcast game. So so anyway, yeah, that was cool. Honestly, as we kind of look forward to like what we would like this show to be in the future, I love talking and talking about all our challenges. I would like to when we first did the show, we had a lot of guests on, right? I remember being so stoked that we had Adam Wathan and Taylor on and Frake and all those folks, right? I think we had Stauffer on at one point, and yeah, I would love to bring some people back on. Oh, I remember when we had Mohammed Syed. He's like, Laravel employee number one. We had him on to talk about stuff, and that was pretty cool, man. That was pretty cool. So yeah, we'll see. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. You got it. Yes. Yes. Yeah, that was fun. God knows how you guys got all that stuff through customs, man. I have no idea. You guys brought so much stuff from customs for everybody. Like you did. You had enough yeah, you had all that Vegemite and you had like, different like candies and you had I just used the you gave me in a little Australia like cooler thing, whatever. I just used that the other day for some for going fishing. We put worms in there. Sorry, I don't know if that's what it was intended for, but hey, it's small and it's a little cooler, and so I was like, oh, Michael gave me this. Let's use this. Um, yeah, but you guys had all sorts of cool stuff. You even had, I think you even had like presents for my kids and stuff. Like they had big coloring books and yeah, that was super fun. Some Australian flags, and it was funny because they actually were studying Australia at school during that time as well, I think, or really really close to that, and so they yeah. Yeah. And so they got to take some of that stuff to school and be like, yeah, I got all this stuff from Australia. I think there was a stuffed animal in there too. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, it's true. I remember the first time my kids saw like a made in China tag. They're like, Dad, this is made in China, like on the other side of the world. It's like really from China. I'm like, yeah, buddy, like everything's made in China. Oh my word. Speaking of stuff made in China, we went camping this weekend, and before we went camping, like I decided, hey, let's take the kids to. It was just a boys' trip, just the men of the family, and so we went to Walmart and just went down the camping aisle, and I was like, let's get a couple things, and so the kids got like flashlights for like $1. But they come with batteries and everything. You just pretty much like throw them away when you're done because they're never going to turn on again. Um, yeah, exactly. But that was fun. My my kids, my oldest kid has really been into fishing. Huge into fishing. He caught like a 12-inch bass, and that was the end of it. It was like every day now he wants to go fishing every day. And so while we were camping, I had to teach him how to take a fish off the hook. So it's like fun catching them. It's not quite as fun having to grab the fish and then take the hook out, right? Exactly. Yep, you got it. And so he's been working on that, and so that was cool. So he went today with a friend and caught 25 bluegill and two turtles. Not on purpose, the turtles, but two turtles. Yeah, if you can imagine that. So that's been pretty cool. Like my kid's getting old enough to like go, ride his bike down to the pond with his buddy and fish. I remember like dreaming of this day when I was when we had young kids and I see people with like young kids, it's just like you are the entertainment. It's like it will come someday. It'll be like, hey, buddy, go play with your friends and just be able to like send them on their merry way on their bikes and go play for a bit. So that's been pretty cool. I mean, that's literally just been a very recent thing, but it's been pretty fun to watch that happening. It's been cool. Yeah, I understand that. I too. I totally understand that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So he can make up his own mind. I send him over. Send him over here. We'll go camping with him. We'll take him. That is the thing. Is like you have this like you hit this like critical mass of like you have enough stuff now to go camping on your own. Like you kind of have to go with friends until you get enough stuff. So like you get the tent, but then it's like the sleeping bags. But then it's like if you don't have a mat to sleep on with the sleeping bags, then it's like you're super uncomfortable. And then it's like you got to have something to do while you're there. So you got to have the equipment to start fire. And then like you got to have the equipment to like cook food over that fire. And then it's like, you know what I mean? So it's just all those things. And it's like you'd be a crazy person to buy all that stuff to go one time. Right. So you kind of have to like mooch off friends until if you remember Jordan Brill, he's got everything known to man, like every camping tool you'd ever want. He's got all of them. Probably got two of them. And he's the same guy who gives his kids like machetes to go around the campsite and whack stuff with, right? He's just a crazy man. And so we went with them a couple times. Then we got enough stuff to go on our own. So yeah, it's been fun. We've gone a couple times this summer. But I was curious. Do you guys have like, did you go fishing as a kid ever, like over there? Okay. Oh no. Yeah, that's different than like fishing off the shore. Oh, nice. Those catch like they catch big fish out there though, right? I mean, like off the big. I'm guessing the jetty is like the pier, like the big long pier that goes out into the ocean, right? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. And so they probably catch pretty big fish out there, huh? Oh, okay. Are you like a bay? Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh man. Yeah, sure. Yeah, like, Dad, can we be done? Oh, that's fun. Yeah. You'll do them because you're a good dad, but not because you like doing them. Yeah. Soccer, you actually called it soccer. I'm impressed. Thank you. Did you call it football? Did you guys call it football? You guys don't call it football? I know you do. You got footy. You call it footy. Like Australian leagues football. Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize Australians call it soccer. I did not realize that. Indeed. It's funny. Basketball. He'll pick up basketball. You know he will. You can both enjoy. Sure. Oh. Yeah, that's tough. Yes, indeed. Oh man, that'd be rough. That's a lot to around here. It's like they do have travel soccer leagues, but it's travel baseball. It's brutal, just brutal. Yeah, I promised my wife will never do that because it's just every weekend it's like see you later, and then one parent goes one way while the other parent goes the other way. Yeah, it's tough. So exactly. Yeah, it's similar here. Ah, yes. Right. Mhm. Are they twins? Oh, gotcha, gotcha. Okay, that's fun. That's gonna be you guys. That's gonna be you guys. Go for it, Michael. You got it. Yep, you got it. You can do it. Oh my. Yeah, you know what? You guys have 2 beautiful children, though. I mean, just be it's like some people try and have kids for years and don't get to have any. You guys have 2 beautiful, healthy children, like, no need, right? And I was just looking online and some guy was like, I don't remember who it was, Pete or something. And he was like, I'm 11 months into this thing and I can't imagine why anybody would ever want to have another child. And it's like, I get it. Like, at 11 months, like, it's really depending on your situation. But I'm sure as a parent of 2 now, you can kind of see some of the benefits of at least having one other one, allowing them to have a sibling, right? Like, they can grow up together and be like, oh, yeah, mom and dad were crazy. Like, there's somebody else to relate with, right? Yeah, sure. There you go. So she got her way. Yeah. Yep. That lady hasn't had sleep for like, 4 years. Yeah. My gosh. Your poor wife. Little sleep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, right. Sure. Right. Is she trying to convince you to have another one? Is she like, "Let's do one more?" She's like, "Let's go. Let's go get this done. Let's get this done." Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Yep. That was exactly us. Well, not twins, but yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. That's where we were at. Yeah. Yeah. Zone defense. Yep. No, I think, I mean, yeah, you guys are very blessed for sure. Very blessed. So that's really cool. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Spit an image. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Well, that's cool, man. Hey, I have a couple like programming related things I wanted to talk about today too. Yeah, we definitely should. Um, yep. One item I'm going to say real quick is that I think eventually here I am going to have a permanent office in this house. I'm taking over the spare bedroom. I just like I told my wife, I was like, "Hey, I think I'm gonna make that an office." She's like, "You definitely should do that." I'm like, "Okay, let's do it." Because that room gets used a couple, 3, 4, maybe 5 times a year, and it's just like it's right there. Like, why don't I just use that room, And so anyway, I'm gonna start doing that. So I'm thinking about getting a Murphy bed though. You know what I mean? Those ones that like push up into the wall. Have you ever seen those? So like, yeah, exactly like that. Yeah, which I think is pretty cool because I'd like to be able to make it so that we could still use it for a spare room if somebody needed to. But that I could have it set up as an office as well. So we'll see. I got a couple things I need to plan through, but that'll be good. Um, I was going to bring up that Knights of the Flexbox table. Have you seen that? What'd you think of it? Yeah, I thought so too. That's really cool. So yeah, really well. So Marcel created that. The only thing I was thinking through on that was there was a couple of them where like you would make a change and it wasn't completely obvious that they changed because there was like the red and the yellow and the blue. The only difference was like the little thing on the top of their head, like the little color on the top of their head. So so to be sure, like this is not a crit. I mean, it's a comment more than a criticism. It's awesome. I really enjoyed it. But if each one of the knights was like a different character looking, that'd be kind of cool, right? Like that'd be pretty interesting. If like the red ones were like a certain, like they were shorter and like bulky or something, and the blue ones are taller and thinner. I don't know, something. Anyway, there you go. See, you got it. You should make a rip-off version. Just copy the source code. Yeah, there you go. Just make a copy of his source code and just switch out the sprites and you'll be all set. No problem. So that was really fun. There were some interesting things I learned about that. So Flex Wrap Reverse was interesting. I don't really use that much. But it's like instead of wrapping from the top, so going uh so like you have this with Flexbox, it will say I'm just going to keep them in a single row and I'll just adjust the sizes of them to make it so that it'll work. But you can say flex wrap, of course, which will say, oh, okay, I'll break them across lines. But if you flex wrap reverse, it basically starts them from the bottom right and then wraps them around the opposite way, which was interesting. I've never seen that. So it's like it starts at the end and then wraps them, fills them up from the opposite end, which was really interesting. So that was something I learned. Flex wrap reverse. Then there was the order thing. So like on a particular item within a Flex container, you can, and of course this is using Tailwind classes that I'm talking about. You could use just as easily use these things in like CSS, right? If you're just applying like an inline style or something like that. But with Tailwind, you have this order class. You can say order dash, and then you can specify where that item should be in the order of the items that are listed in that Flex container, which is really cool because if you're doing responsive designs and you need to sort of switch around the order, you have complete freedom to use whatever order you want, wherever you want, whenever you want, at whatever breakpoint. So it's pretty interesting. It's really, really cool. So learned about that. So order dash, and then there was one other one, but I can't remember what it was. But it was anyway. It was very cool.
The self stretch and the order, all that stuff that I never use because most of my layout is very much, just justify between or space, space X, space Y, and I don't don't dig too deeply. Sometimes I'll justify center, item center, done kind of thing. So it's cool. It's cool that Flex is so flexible, but
yeah, it really is.
For a lot of things, like I never find myself thinking, gee, how would I go about reversing these items? Because I would probably, I guess if you wanted to reverse them on a different breakpoint or something like that, but generally speaking, like it's either top to bottom or left to right for me. And I don't do any right to left stuff. So
on occasion, I'll do it where, like, sometimes you'll want to do a website where you'll have image left, text right, and then on the next stripe you'll want to do image right, text left. Well, on the ones where I want to do image left, text right, what I typically want that to look like on mobile is I actually want the text to come first and then the image afterwards, because I need the text, the image is supporting the text at that point.
Yeah.
Right. And so in that case, what I'll do is like a mobile first design, I would do, in my design, what I'll do is I'll have text and then the image, and that's on flex col, whatever. And then when it's on desktop, it'll be flex row, but it'll be like flex row reverse. And so it flips the order of them. And so that works pretty good most of the time. But there are occasions where having that order would be really nice. But when it gets too complicated like that, Grid to the rescue. Grid is really freaking awesome. And he needs to make Grid, Knights of the Grid table next. That'd be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, and I think Marcel tweeted that they were looking at making a sequel that might be Grid focused. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there.
That's cool.
I say that I don't really use those things, but I was just looking at when you were mentioning the whole flipping of things on mobile, so that text always comes before images. I remembered back to when I was making some changes to the work website, and I did actually use flex col reverse there. So I make a lot out of myself.
Yeah. So that's the question there. So you said flex col reverse. So in that case, do you typically lay it out for desktop and then you'll flex col reverse on mobile? Yeah. Okay.
It's just the way that worked out, because the part of the work that I was doing was to make the website more mobile friendly, because it was not at all.
That makes sense.
It's like, it's 5, 6, 7, 10-year-old website that they've just like patched bits onto over time. So when they built it, mobile first wasn't really a thing. So it was like, okay, this is how it looks on desktop, and then let's patch in the mobile stuff. So yeah, definitely in that regard. And I think, well, you did the Then Ping Me website where we had the preview images and things like that. They were the same kind of thing, like text image text image. And but I think you used Grid for that from memory.
I might have. I used Grid in a couple places, and then I used Flex in a couple places. Man, I really miss doing like I haven't done a ton of that recently. There was a project not too long ago that I was using all that stuff on, but like those space utilities that you just brought up are so freaking handy. Yeah. I totally forgot about that. Like SpaceX, SpaceY, those are so nice to use. But I really got into Grid for a little bit there when I was working on the Then Ping Me stuff, and then I just fell out of it. Like I haven't used it in a while, but man, it's powerful. It's really, really good stuff. So pretty cool. I was also going to talk about testing validation. So, you have a request that's coming in, and you have validation rules that are going to run against a request that comes in. Personal preference. Do you typically test those validation rules, or do you just kind of say like, meh, I mean, like it's going to validate, right? There it is. It works.
I don't typically test the rules. I test the behavior, if that makes sense. So I'm going I'll have the rules, and then I'll just make, post requests to endpoints and expect that certain validation errors are there, but I won't test the rules themselves.
So how do you test? So like, I guess what I'm saying is like, do you test the validation? So like, for example, will you make a request that says it fails with an invalid email, and then you put an invalid email in and just make sure that the validation rules are? You will do that? Okay. So
but not for like every validation rule.
Sure. Okay. So like what
edge casey things, anything that's like require if or require unless, like those weird rules that are easy to get wrong, that I will typically get the parameters wrong, or I'll refer to the wrong fields or something like that. Anything that's kind of business critical, anything that's generic, like make sure there's a name, or make sure there's any of the required stuff. It just you can get out of hand, and you can use data sets and things like that in your test to basically. But then you've got a one-to-one mapping, and you're coupling your test to the validation. That like you have a name required, and so then in your test you have a data set that is name required, and then you don't, you omit the name, and then you get back a required thing. And so you are just at that point coupling your test to your implementation, of the validation rules, and I don't think necessarily that provides a lot of value. Especially that, because that means the next person that comes in there, or you in 6 months, you're like, oh, we've got to add this new validation rule, but you might forget to update the data set, or you might change something and then you test break. Well, changing something in your test breaking is a good thing. Adding a new validation rule, but then forgetting that you've got this giant data set and then testing that kind of makes that kind of pointless. So,
yeah. But, and again, it's like one of those things. So sometimes you don't know, like, okay, you have a what if thing, right? So tests are good for multiple things. They're good for ensuring that you kind of have this green wall at your back that's like, okay, I'm not going to have a regression, and I'm not going to like break stuff that's already in place. But it's also really helpful for figuring out what you're doing, right? So you're saying like, in your test, if you're writing the test first, you say, if I pass this and I don't pass something here, validation should break, right? That's how it should happen. I don't know how that's going to work yet, but that's how it should happen, right? You know the behavior, but you don't yet know the code that's going to be written to do that, right?
Correct.
The require with or require if or whatever is a perfect example. Like I use those, but every time I come to them, I'm like, am I remembering how to use that right? Like, am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah.
And so like, I'll go look up documentation, but sometimes it's just as easy to just say like, oh, I'll just write a quick test, just stub out a quick test here. If this is here and this isn't, it should throw a validation error. And then I can just try it. Require if this is this. Oh, yep, it broke. There we go. That's how it should work.
Yeah, because you know what your business logic is. You know that like this has to be set, and if this is set, then this shouldn't be, or if this isn't set, this should be set. And so it doesn't matter what the specific string of rules are. You've got your behavior. You just make that test pass, and I think that's a lot more valuable than just doing a one-to-one mapping of validation rules.
Totally. So the reason I'm asking is because I recently came across a post that was talking about this. They're like, how do you test validation stuff in Laravel? Do you test every validation rule? And so there are arguments to be made to say like, yes, I want to test validation. And if it changes, I should have a test that fails because it's important that this validates this way, right? Like if somebody else came in and you didn't notice that they removed the validation that said alphanumeric, but your database is relying on it being alphanumeric, right? You can't use like a dash in there because you're using, or you can't use an underscore because you're mapping a username to an S3 bucket that's going to store an avatar, and underscores don't work in S3. So you can't use you can't use anything other than alphanumeric, right? So, like in those specific instances, maybe there is some value to having the tests there. So that's the question, right? So, but the way that they were suggesting that you do it is basically what you said. You have just an integration test essentially that says I want to pass some faker data to a post request, and I should expect that if I have a name and an email that are both required, if I don't pass the name, it should come back with a 403. I think is what it's. No, not 403. That's unauthorized. I can't remember what it is. 422. Thank you. It should come back with 422. Similarly with an email, right? If I don't send an email, it should come through as 422, or if I send a bad email, it should come through as 422, right? So you can do that, but then you have like this n+1 number of tests, the happy path plus all the bad paths, right? So that's quote unquote full coverage. But they don't, like you said, they provide like zero value. That's or very little in any case. Relative to the other parts of the application anyway, it's not very important. So you don't want to spend a lot of time writing it, but it would be nice to have it there if you could do it really easily, right? Yeah. And so Jason McCurry has a blog post out there about form request validation. The one that I got to this one from was essentially suggesting what you said just a couple minutes ago, which is like those data providers where you can pass in an array, and then you could say, as a secondary thing, you should say assert that it's going to say email is invalid, or this is, assert. I think at the end of a post request, you could say assert response contains error, and then you can pass in the key that you think should be an error, right? So anyway, you could do it using those data providers, which Titan has a really good blog post on. But what Jason McCurry suggests, and it's a trade-off for sure, but he suggests using form requests for all validation. So this is the other half of the discussion, which is, do you use form requests? Do you have a rule where you say like, I will have up to 2 validation rules inside a controller, but if I have 3, I'm going to break it out to a form request? Or, do you kind of have a heuristic for what you adhere to when it comes to those sorts of things?
I think I'm starting to prefer form requests more, if for no other reason than to just keep controllers light.
Right.
Some might argue that form requests mean that you've got tighter coupling to the framework going further into your application. Like you've got more places where it's coupled. Whereas if you have a request validate inside of your controller, then at least all of that coupling is in the one place kind of thing. You know, you're referencing your form, you're referencing your validation there, you're referencing your model there. You know, you can do it all sort of in that one place. But you are coupling it to the framework. If you start using the form request, you know, you're spreading that out a little bit further. I don't particularly care about that myself, because it's like if I'm going to change from Laravel to Cake or whatever, I'm going to rewrite the whole thing anyway. I'm not going to like port bits of it piecemeal. My heuristic for form requests used to be like, if it's more than a handful of rules, if it starts to look busy, then pull it out. It's nicer, I think, to encapsulate all of that, because it's essentially middleware, right? You've got authorization, validation, and any manipulation of the request happens kind of in that form request, and it gives you a nice place to encapsulate where typically the flow is going to be like, accept some data from the request, authorize that the request user is allowed to do anything with it, validate that the data is correct, and then throw it into the database. So it gives you a nice place as well to encapsulate the like for model or for database or to database, like create a method on the request that once all of that passes, you can just essentially transform the request data from that point. And that way your form request, your controller method is basically using dependency injection to type hint the form request. The authorization is done, the validation is done, and then all you need to do in your controller method is like model create, dollar request arrow to model, and then return your response. And it keeps that, the controllers are very compact.
Yes. And anything that's going to happen on the request happens in the form request object.
Yeah. And that way you're kind of encapsulating all of that request behavior to the request object, rather than doing, validation in your controller. And because the controller traditionally, in a traditional sense, is like, it should just be routing things, getting some input and putting it into a database and then returning a response, rather than
it's just gluing the pieces together.
Correct.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think I've been preferring the form request more recently, just to kind of keep it's tricky if you're using Livewire, because it doesn't really support requests in that regard. Like if you're posting something, you're calling a method on a Livewire component, but broadly speaking, I think form requests probably better, unless it's like a small app or you're just trying to what do you call it? You're just trying to prototype something, then sure, rapid
application development, right?
Yeah. If you're just trying to get a proof of concept together, there's no point like splitting all these things out, because you don't know if you're going to need it, or if if there's another approach. Like the action pipeline stuff has become fairly popular recently, since Jetstream came out. That gets a good run around, and so that might be more appropriate for your application beyond the proof of concept phase and things like that. So I think if you're just trying to throw something together just to see if it works, then just shove everything into the controller. If you've got an established application, and certainly in my last job, I was doing more of this towards the end, was just like form requests for everything, because it just tidied things up and made them a little bit more easy to work with.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I really do like the idea of custom methods on requests. The only time where that gets a little bit messy is if a person who's coming in doesn't realize that that the request in the controller is type hinting a custom request, and then they see some method on a request and like, oh, that must be a Laravel thing, and it's like, well, I mean, it is, but it's like a form request thing, right? It's a method on the form request.
It's a Laravelism.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, interestingly, though, so Jason basically says, yes, you have. So if you want to test this way, you have to use form requests.
Mm-hmm.
But then what he says is you basically only ever have to have 2 tests to test this out. So the first test, all it does is it asserts that you're using the correct form request object. So it just says, hey, check that when I call the newsletter subscription controller in the store request, that it's using the newsletter store subscription class as the request, right? That's what it should be using. So that's test number 1. That's all the controller has to care about, is that it's using the correct form request. Test is done. That's that one, right? The second test you have to write, and this applies no matter how many validation rules you have. You can have 15 validation rules. You still only have to write 2 tests. The second test, what it is it's in this case, it would be a store newsletter subscription test, which this is going to test your form request object. And all it does is it basically has an assertion that says, call the rules. So give you the rules, and here's what the rules should be. And as long as the rules are the same, test passes. The point being, what you said is it's not really our job to test that the framework works, right? They have tests to make sure that when you get an email and you put email validation, it's going to do that correctly.
Correct.
They have tests to make sure that when you say alphanumeric, it's going to work as an alphanumeric. You don't have to come up with examples of like, how does a broken email look? Okay, let's do that and let's make sure that it's working. You don't need to do that, right? All you need to do is validate that what's in the form request is what you're expecting it to be. So all you really have to do is you just basically say, here's what it is. Is the form request that? And if it is, they match up, test is done, right?
Yeah.
So that's it. So there are complaints. There are things that you'd say like, well, if you change anything, you're going to have to change the test. But if you're going for 100% coverage, you're always going to have to do that no matter what. So the question then becomes, well, which is easier to do? This for me seems by far way easier. And since you're also going to have another test class because you're going to be testing the form request object, you have a spot to test all those little methods that you're going to be using on your form request object instead of trying to get into the controller method, right? If you're doing some fancy switching around of request stuff in the controller, instead of having to try and do some integration tests to get all at that piece, you just have your form request test and you can test this little public method that you have on there if you care to. So it just seems really nice. And I read this article last week. I was like, that makes such good sense. And so I shared it with our team and I was like, I think this is the way we're going to start doing this moving forward. It just seems really, it encapsulates all those tricky little pieces that can be difficult to test, or that a lot, to be fair, actually don't get tested a lot. They just sort of like, well, we're just going to assume this is always going to work until it doesn't work, right? So anyway, we'll share the note, or we'll share the article in the show notes.
Yeah.
I figured, 100th episode, we probably should talk at least a little bit about some code stuff. So yeah, there's that one. There is that one.
Just on like writing tests to validate that the framework works. I've been on a tear with nping lately, just doing things that have kind of been sitting.
You have been
that I've been wanting to
get
done with, and one of those things is
2 a.m. Ping. Oh, Michael's working. Oh, ping. He got another pull request in. Michael's killing it. All right.
And
it has been.
I said at the start of the show that like, Eli's sleeping through the night and Liv is starting to sleep better. Like we'll put her down at 7:38 and she'll sleep until about 11, and then from 11 she might wake up again about 3, but most of the time she's sleeping through the night. And so it's giving me a bit of time after the kids go to sleep to actually sit down and do some work on Then Ping Me. So the bit that I've been working on at the moment is ripping out all of our custom subscription stuff that we had. So when we built Then Ping Me, we chose not to use Spark because we wanted to own the design, for lack of a better term, because it's a Tailwind UI thing, but we wanted to own the design as much as possible and have control over it. So we didn't want the site or the user side of things to look like Spark. And then the new version of Spark came out and we'd already shipped, months ago before Spark came out, all of our billing stuff, and we were using the Stripe billing portal and the Stripe customer portal to manage all of that kind of stuff. And we started down the path of like giving users the ability to modify their plan from within our own thing. But now that the new Spark is out, I started back in February. When it came out, I started to convert over to Spark and kind of sat there. And when I picked it up again this week, I'm like, most of this is already done, so I don't have to worry about it. But it was still like the separate portal. Like, it was click billing and it would take you to another page, which is well designed and it looks great and all of that kind of stuff. But it kind of disjoints from the experience of using like Then Ping Me. So Frake actually put out a post some time ago where they converted Odear to use Spark and how to go about that. And so it boils down to publishing the assets from Spark, removing the sidebar, putting it into our own layout component or layout, blade view, and then it's done. And then it came to all of our tests broke because I started deleting things, all of the things that tested like how to, that you could change a plan and that certain things happened after a plan change and things like that, dispatching jobs that don't exist anymore. And so now I'm like in two minds because we have a whole bunch of this functionality that was tested to make sure that it functioned, because we'd written all of that stuff ourselves, that we would send a request to Stripe and then Stripe would send us a webhook and then we would we would process that webhook, fire a job, which would then go and update the subscription record on our end. All of that stuff is now part of Spark. So I have all these tests that are broken and I'm just trying to figure out how much of that I need to test as like behavior that is part of our application and how much of that is like, when I change the plan should change kind of thing. Because I just, the assumption now is that Spark handles that, Spark is tested, all of that works. So we just test like around the edges of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and kind of a bit iffy about that because I need to kind of test some of, as I said, test around the edges of Spark to make sure that the application, like the business logic side of things, still works. So, if you're on a plan that has 10 projects and you want to downgrade to a plan that only has one project, like we have to restrict that. Now, I'm pretty sure Spark does have that functionality in there. That like you can say, there's like you pass it a closure and it'll say whether or not you can move to a certain plan. So, we put the check inside that closure and say, okay, well, you've got 3 projects and you're trying to move to a plan that only allows 1. So you have to go and get rid of those projects first. Because obviously we can't decide for you which ones you keep and which you still have access to and which ones you don't. But we still need to test that, like when you're in, if you've only got one project and you change plans to a plan that only supports one project, that you cannot still add a project. Like we still need to have that kind of test in there. So it's a matter of like figuring out which bits and pieces need to be removed, changed, whatever, so that we can still test the application behavior without testing the sort of Stripe side or the Spark side of things. So that's been an adventure that I haven't.
Yeah, trying to figure
really
out like where that line is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, it comes down to like what you said before about not writing tests to test the framework. Not writing tests to test.
Don't
Spark.
test what you don't own. Right. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. But like we kind of still have to test fairly close because I still have to send that plan change request. And then, because you had built all of the stuff to test, like sending the request to Stripe and handling the responses, and you had the test Stripe gateway and things like that we don't use now because we're switching over to using all of the stuff that Spark provides. So figuring out how to do all that kind of stuff as well has been the fun thing. So that's where I'm at with that part of it. There's been a whole bunch of other stuff that I've been working on in that regard. We've got some new features coming in terms of being able to manage your settings. So at the moment, you can tell on a task by task basis, you can say, don't send me an alert for this task unless it fails on 3 consecutive executions. So being able to manage those from within your own application. So you could set the settings globally for your app, like by default, do this unless I have overridden it on a task by task basis. And that would just make it easier because then you can, one of the things that we focused really hard on with Then Ping Me was making it as hands-free as possible. So the installation is, if you've used any of the other services out there, you've got to go into the web UI, you've got to create a new like endpoint or a new monitor or whatever, which gives you a URL that you then have to configure to say, okay, this thing is supposed to run every 5 minutes. Tell me if it hasn't responded within 6 minutes. And that's, we wanted to get away from that because we've made it specifically for Laravel. It means that we can infer a whole bunch of things based on configurations that are sent to us.
Right.
Like we know
from the kernel,
we know already that you have scheduled this task every 5 minutes, which means that we expect it to check in every 5 minutes with an allowed grace period of 60 seconds. And we allow every task to run for a minute by default. And so because it's like that hands-free, we just assume, we make the assumptions about all of that stuff. And if you need to change it, then you come into the UI and you make the changes on a task by task basis. But it's a bit finicky to do that, to come in, to click on a thing, to go to settings, to update, and whatever.
Right.
So if you can do that all from your console kernel and just push the settings across, that way they're always in sync with whatever you've got in your application. And that way you can update the ones that you need to, do a deploy, do a sync to then ping me, and it's done. So
totally.
That's all. Like I had that written ages ago. Again, I
remember when you talked about it the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd written all the client side stuff, and then I went to write the then ping me side, and I was like, oh, all this code is already here. So I just deployed it into a staging environment and tested it. I'm like, not only is it all here, it all works. So I've been holding off because
it would be really.
You go on.
You know, what would be really cool would be. It would be really cool to have like a Gantt chart. I know like people like puke in their mouth when they hear that word, right? Gantt chart. They're like, oh gosh. But like, if you think about it, like if you had like a schedule of your day and a Gantt chart of when scheduled tasks kicked off and how long they took to run, that'd be really freaking cool. And you could probably have, so Chrome does a great job of this, or any developer tools really. Like when the initial request was made versus when it started getting bytes received and like whatever. So like you might have scheduled tasks that are scheduled to run every hour, but what you would end up seeing is that all these tasks that were scheduled to run every hour, you have this line here, right? And here's the line where they were supposed to start. But then what you're going to see is you're going to see the waterfall. Task one. Yeah. Here to here, task 2, here to here, task 3, here to here. 5 minutes kicked off. Okay, you have other charts. You have other ones that are now going to start overlapping. That would be a really great visual reference because, like, I know you came up with that graphic, which I thought was genius, like around the clock, to be able to show like here's where you have all these tasks scheduled and they're going to overlap. But sometimes it can be difficult to visualize that, especially the waterfall effect of if you have them all scheduled to not run in background, like if you do have them just scheduled for all on the hour, what ends up happening is they run sequentially, not asynchronously, right? They run one after the other. And so it's like, sometimes you have jobs that are really delayed because there's this one job that you have that's scheduled to run once a day at 3:00, but it's a huge job and you don't have it running in the background. So like as a result, all of your other jobs are delayed, but only once a day. So like every day at 3:00, all my jobs are delayed. You guys have this thing is platform's broken. No, it's not broken. It's actually not. It's that you have a task that's taking forever. And so when you go in to see it, it's not obvious how that's happening. But having a waterfall chart, like I said Gantt chart because that's what pops into my head. But having something like that, I think would be pretty interesting.
Yes, I am. That is the most common support request that I have seen for then ping me since we started it.
Yeah,
and it's always like right after someone configures a project, or just starts using then ping me for the first time.
And they say, "Oh yeah, it's not working because
then ping me's not working." I'm like, no. Believe it or not, it's actually, and it's difficult to explain that to the customer, the user. It's actually your application.
Like, this is why we built this. Yeah, actually, this is the reason the thing that you're reporting. That's why we built this.
Yeah. We're not sending false alerts. We are sending you an alert based on what is happening in your application, and it's there to tell you that like this is happening. And so, I was looking the other day at a bunch of things as I was working through some optimizations and things like that. And after I made the optimizations, I'm like, I better go and check that everything is still working for everyone. So I went and found there was one customer that like they would constantly be getting alerts. I'm like, why are they getting alerts? And it was exactly that once I think it was like once a day, the exact same scenario as you. They had this one job that was taking, 36 minutes to run, which meant that the jobs that were running within that 30-minute window, at every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes or whatever, when they lined up with that job that was taking 36 minutes to run, well, the 36-minute job ran. The 5-minute job, like the every 5-minute job, was waiting to be able to start because they were not running in background. And so it was delayed a minute, and then the whole application goes into an alert state because it's like, well, this task is not running when it should be because it was waiting to be able to start because the console kernel, the Laravel scheduler, will run the task one after the other in the order that they're defined in the kernel. So if you've got like this daily task that runs at 3 o'clock at the top of your console kernel and all the 5-minute tasks are after it, well, that task once a day is going to run first, then the next one, then the next one, the next one. So, that that clock chart is something that I've been like thinking about on and off for like the last year. How do I visualize this? How do I make it obvious what is happening here and how this happens? And that seemed to be quite well received. I got a lot of good feedback on that one, cool. Which is good. So, I hope to be able to animate that some way. I've been asked to give a talk at a meetup at the end of next month. Well, this month now. Jeez, it's August. At the end of this month, to sort of talk about the optimizations we went through with NPingMe this past week or so, and like how we kind of stumbled onto that and how that is a thing that happens. So it'll be interesting to see.
Michael's use of the word "we" here is very generous. We meaning Michael. That was a great write-up, by the way. Yeah, that was a great write-up. It is. I
got some good feedback on that as well. It was just like really talking through the problem. So, not everyone's running a scheduled task monitoring service, and I don't think that's the takeaway here. This was more about like, what do you do with your application to account for sudden influxes of traffic, and that that was the thing. Like, if you're using Vapor and you want to build an application that will scale, then these are the things that you need to consider. So the limitation on most every Laravel application, and I'm going to say Laravel specifically, but it extends to other frameworks, other languages, things like that. The limitation on most applications that are writing to a database is not going to be PHP or Laravel or Nginx or FPM or any of that. It's going to be your database. And this is something that we found that sort of started to creep up recently. Like, we saw it in the early days and we kind of worked around it a little bit. And then I started to see it creeping up sort of intermittently now, where every now and then we'd get our task ping, like our job that handles an incoming ping, those would start to reach, the max execution limits, max execution exceptions in the queue, in Laravel's queue handling on our side.
Mm-hmm.
And then that cascaded into too many connections errors, and then that cascades into alerts being sent to our users because, hey, your task hasn't checked in, but it's us who have been able to process that job to tell you that to verify that the task has happened. So now we're sending you false alerts, and that's obviously not a good thing from a monitoring perspective. So, and that all came down to like, Vapor is fantastic, and AWS Lambda is fantastic in scaling infinitely at the HTTP layer. If you suddenly get 1,000 concurrent requests or 10,000 concurrent requests or whatever, then Lambda will scale up and it will accept all of those requests and it will charge you for all of those requests.
And then it'll try and hit your database.
And then it'll try and hit your database.
It'll lose its mind.
And then your database will go, well, I can only we've only running the smallest, like the T3 micro database, because in terms of storage, in terms of process, like we're not doing anything hugely processor or memory intensive. So the smallest thing is fine. The problem with the smallest database instance is that it will only support about 85 concurrent connections. So when, and this happens typically at the top of the hour and at midnight, UTC. So when everyone's running their daily tasks, over the course of the day, that becomes hundreds and hundreds of tasks all pinging in at once. And Lambda will happily go, no worries, I will give you 100 concurrent connections or, whatever to serve all of those incoming pings. But the database, which you are querying for every single one of those using route model binding or, subsequent checks to see that the task exists in the project, that the subscription is active, all of that kind of stuff, can't get through to the database because the database is going, I can only do 85 at a time. There are some ways around that. You can use an RDS proxy, and that will then pull the connections at the proxy and then send them through to the database, and everything will be hunky-dory in theory. But we're using MySQL 8, which doesn't support that, so that's out of the question. The fiscally irresponsible thing would be to just scale up the database, but then we've got this database server that's sitting there capable of taking, And so what do we do? Every time we onboard a new customer, we have to review how many concurrent connections we might see over the course of a day, and then you've got to scale that database.
Costly too.
It's gonna be massively expensive because you then have to scale a database that can support the maximum number of connections that you're going to see over the day and do nothing for the rest of the day. And so what we ended up doing is just caching the crap out of everything. So every single touch point on that ping endpoint is cached now. And we just throw it all into DynamoDB. And so anywhere where we were running a query, all of our route model binding is all the result of cached data. So we'll just put it all in. We say cache forever. Here is the key. Return me the result of this, and go from there. And then the number of concurrents, like, because we can do this now, we can scale infinitely because we're never touching the database. Dynamo is designed to run at any scale at single-digit millisecond response times on reads. So anytime you sync, we take all of your tasks, we throw them at the cache. We update the project in the cache. Anytime your subscription changes, we throw that in the cache so that we've always got, because these are things that are not changing often. So we can just put them in the cache and leave them there. If you delete a task or change a task, we'll update it or remove it. And it can just sit there forever. And so now when the HTTP request comes in, rather than doing route model binding against the database, we route model bind against the result of a cache lookup. And so that returns instantly. When we check that the task exists, that is the result of a check against the cache. That is instant. The subscription check against the database, against the cache as well, that's instant. The only place that we had a bit of difficulty was within handling of the webhooks themselves, because we take the request payload and throw that in the database, and we have to do that fairly early on, because if anything happens, we still need to have a record that webhook request came in. So now we will take the payload and we'll pass that along to the job. And we have to take the payload, throw the payload in S3, and then send that to the job, because sometimes the payloads are bigger than the allowed size for SQS. So, working around all of these things to have now an endpoint where this was taking close to 300 milliseconds before, they're now served in roughly half the time. So I'm not sure how to gauge the metrics, because I think if I send a ping to the endpoint, it takes like 800 milliseconds or whatever to start to finish. But I'm also sending it to an endpoint. This is the thing that I don't quite understand with Vapor and CloudFront. Like, it's supposed to hit an endpoint closer to me, but anyway, it's much quicker than it was. And our queue jobs that were taking like 300 milliseconds to run are now running in under 100 milliseconds. So everything's working much quicker. I've been balancing now the amount of memory that's allocated to the Lambdas that are used to see if we can get, the cost to the speed ratio right. Because Lambda charges per millisecond, and then the cost scales based on how much memory you have allocated. So I'm trying to get those Lambdas to run.
Now you're just tuning.
Yeah, now it's tuning. So now I'm trying to get those Lambdas to run as quickly as possible with the right amount of memory so we can balance the cost that we're being charged versus like how quickly we can run them. So that's just a bit of tweaking and seeing, pulling different levers and seeing, what's the build look like now, kind of thing. So, yeah, it was an interesting challenge. It was fortunate the way that we had constructed all of that stuff that it was not a huge amount of work. Just adding a few tests to make sure that the cache keys get set properly when they should. But other than that, everything kind of just works as it should. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for doing all that work, man. It's that was a bear. That was a bear for sure.
It certainly helps with the next phase of like now that I'm confident that we can scale up, we can sort of start working more on more of these features. So I want to get the Spark stuff done. Want to get the task setting stuff's done, and then we can start working on new features. And now that I'm not worried about the database falling over or costs blowing out or whatever for scaling, once we get this billing stuff sorted out, we can sort of start looking at the next phase of now doing a bit of a marketing push and starting to get more people in, because we've been running this for a year now, quite happily. Customers don't complain. Things work generally, up until this last couple of weeks as we started to tip the scale a little bit. So it'd be good to get, and now that the things have settled down a little bit with the kids, it'd be nice to get a bit of a renewed push on then Ping Me and get some more work done on it.
Indeed. Well, hey man, this has been a good 100th episode, I'd say. A lot, far cry from what episode 1 was. So proud to have been doing this long, and here's to another 100, eh?
Yeah. Let's keep at it. Let's see if we can mix things up a little bit. See if we can talk to some people. I know that
sounds good.
There's a lot of cool stuff going on in the community at the moment with different people, and it's not just different people, but it's new people as well, which is encouraging to see. Oh yeah,
totally.
There's a whole bunch of new names that are doing some cool things. We've got next episode. You've recorded an episode or an interview with Aaron Francis, who is the co-host of the Hammerstone podcast. He's recently released Torchlight, which is a SaaS that you can that does syntax highlighting for you, but like good syntax highlighting. If you've ever used Prism or Highlight.js or anything like that, even like the server-side common mark stuff that you can get, it all kind of works, but they're kind of also, client-side implementations and things like that are trying to sort of build syntax highlighting on top of, re-implementing syntax highlighters and things like that. Whereas the approach that was taken with Torchlight was to essentially make it a hosted service that handles running all this stuff through the same syntax highlighting engine that VS Code uses. So there's a lot of work done to make sure that that's quite robust, because it's part of a code editor. So, getting all of that and then getting back the rendered HTML to make that work. I've started playing around with it earlier today, and it's super easy to get up and running. It's worth the $5 a month to have it doing all that stuff for you, and it just looks so much better and it's way more accurate. So, yeah, definitely check out torchlight.dev. I have a link to that in the show notes. Just some cool stuff from some cool people out there in the community lately. So it'd be nice to maybe start talking to some people about stuff, because I mean, you and I, we we do this and we've always got something to talk about, but it's a bit same sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get it. I totally agree. Yep. So we'll switch things up a bit. Stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us for a little bit. You can find show notes for this episode at northmeetsouth.audio/100, or the centennial, if you will. If you liked the show, please rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars would be much appreciated. And, of course, hit us up on Twitter at Jacob Bennett, at Michael Dorna, or at North South Audio. Well, folks, until next time, we appreciate you and have a wonderful 2 weeks. We'll see you next time.
See you all. Bye.